And we're live, video 2 from Firepower Gaming. Today, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Alex onto the channel, also known as Storm of Steel Wargaming. So if you haven't checked him out on Twitter or YouTube, you really should, because you're missing an awful lot of really great content. And much like Troy last week, Alex was somebody who I've known through Twitter for quite some time now. We follow, like, and all this kind of thing. And it gives us a great opportunity to meet new people and to chat. And so without further ado, I'd really like to introduce you to Alex. And hopefully he'll start off by telling us a little bit about how he got into wargaming.
Cheers. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me on this. I feel very honoured to be number 2. Should have been number 1, but I'll take number 2. Don't worry. Well, joking. Well, yeah. What's my background? Well, I suppose you got me on here because of the YouTube. You've already mentioned it, which is something I started a little while back. But I've been a wargamer for a long time. I'll talk more about YouTube in a bit. But as a background, really, as a wargamer, I've been doing it since I was about 12, thereabouts, pretty much continually. There's been lapses, of course, there always is, in most people's lives when things get busy and stuff. And I'm an archaeologist by trade, so I've moved around a lot as well. So it's always difficult, to lug around lots of figures with you. So things have dropped off, but I've been a bit more settled in the last 10 years or so. So I've been able to actually just add to the collection more so than I was ever able to in the past, and also having more money these days. But yeah, so, as a wargamer, I started off when I was about 12, playing with Esky figures and the Airfix figures, the 1/72 stuff. Yeah. Probably like a lot of people of our ages, 40 plus, I think youngsters probably more into Games Workshop, but I think us in this upper tier are probably much more Airfix and well, okay, you're obviously 21, I'm 22, but but yeah, I think a lot of us probably started off doing the similar kind of stuff. I started with Napoleonics, which I think is quite different to a lot of, again, kids of my age, because they were more into the Games Workshop fantasy stuff. Yeah. So I used to play with Games Workshop things, but I was always more interested in military, in the historical military side. So Napoleonics and Second World War. But I just used to play Games Workshop games just really to get a game in with somebody, because there was nobody else, who wanted to play. Yeah, so we're not refighting Waterloo again, Alex. Oh, why not? We only did it last week. Come on. But yeah, I was introduced to it at school, really. When I went to secondary school, comprehensive school, when I was about 12. And prior to that, I'd collected toy soldiers, but never really known what to do with them apart from paint them and set them up in battle scenes or whatever. And some guy just mentioned wargaming to me from one of the other villages of the other schools. We all came together, and from there really it went on. So I got into 6mm Second World War stuff. That's what we were playing then when we were pretty young. It was cheap, it was nice and cheap, and Heroics and Ross were the go-to at that time. So that's where we were buying our stuff from,
Yeah.
And you could get quite big armies for next to nothing, for your pocket money, really. And also the plastic figures were dead cheap as well, the 1/72 scale stuff. So I was big into that. And then I kind of got into 15mm as well, really, just through, I think I was in a shop in Sheffield, probably when I was about 13 or 14 again. They were selling 15mm Napoleonic figures. So I bought some of those again. Cheap, really. They were a lot cheaper than the 28mm, 25mm that were around at the time, the fantasy stuff or the bigger stuff. And then I discovered Peter Pig, and then it was kind of like, oh, right, okay, there's a whole range of these things beyond just Napoleonics. And I've kind of really always stuck with 15mm as my mainstay in wargaming. And it has mostly been historicals. I've done some fantasy stuff, bits and pieces like Star Wars, more latterly, with the Legion being released, because I love Star Wars as well. So, well, I love 3 films of Star Wars, shall we say. I'll dial that back.
I must admit, I really enjoyed your Chain of Command Star Wars games that you were doing.
Yeah,
They were
thanks.
fantastic.
I need to get back to that. I need to get back to doing some more of those. I've got a lot of 50mm Star Wars figures, which I mostly Lucky Likeys, but there's also a couple of companies out there that make things that aren't entirely intellectually property tight. But so I managed to pick some of those up. But I want to do some more Star Wars Chain of Command stuff. Because there's some people on Facebook, they've got a group that actually, he's basically covered every single thing you need from Chain of Command for Star Wars. So it's perfect, download their sheets and go from there.
No,
So yes, it's of a. So most of my wargaming has generally been, I'd say, it's mostly 20th century conflicts. So
yeah.
Second War, First War. A friend of mine, he does Spanish Civil War, so we've been experimenting with that a little bit. And Napoleonic War as well, but I'm doing that in 6mm. As I say, that was one of the things I started with. I started with Napoleonic Wars when I was a nipper, and then kind of, when you go to shows and stuff, you see the massive Napoleonic displays. You just think, I could never do that in a lifetime. And then we were talking about it.
Away.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, forever. And you think, then I was talking to my friend about it. I said, because I wanted to get back into Napoleonics, and then Blucher was put out by Sam Mustafa, and I thought this looks great. And I bought the cards and stuff just to test it out and realised, it's a fantastic game. And I was talking to my mate, and he just said, you try 6mm, and I'd not really thought about it. And then I started building up my Napoleonic collection in 6mm as well, which took quite a few years.
I had a little foray into Blucher, but in 2mm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was quite pleased with the way that my units came out. And then I had the idea that I would actually try and make some terrain tiles as well.
Right.
And they were just terrible. They looked absolutely rubbish.
Why? What was up with them? What?
Oh, everything was just brown. I just couldn't get it. Just looked like a huge morass, and I just couldn't get it to look right.
Fair enough.
And I don't know if there's a guy called Adam Bergstrom, I believe, on Twitter as well, who's 3D printed his own terrain tiles. And
right, okay, I've seen that.
Absolutely amazing.
I'll bet. 3D printing's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, if you can afford the printer in the first place, it's cheap as chips, isn't it? I mean, you've got to wait and stuff, haven't you? I don't know if you have one, but I've bought plenty of 3D printed things. Well,
I as part of the Great Recapitalisation project, I sold my second edition AD&D collection. Well, and bought myself a 3D printer.
Oh, okay. Well, at least you put it back into the hobby then.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's absolutely great. One of the things I'm finding is though that it's reasonably accessible, but to get the really, really good quality prints that you see from the likes of Paul and Sabotaged and this kind of thing, you really do need to know your onions.
Yeah, imagine.
And I'm really interested in trying to print my own minis, but I'm just finding that I can't. The resin's still too brittle.
Right.
Okay. I want to do, and I need to experiment a bit more with some of these flexible resins.
Yeah. Because I suppose the more you pay for the resin, the better the prints or it's all the settings. Yeah. I don't really know a great deal about it beyond how it works.
Yeah, no, I mean you can get the resin is quite expensive. But you do get great results. It's just when you're playing with them on the table, I printed a whole raft of 10mm Austrians and French out, and the minis are just continually breaking off the bases. And
right.
I'm trying to experiment to get a bit of flex and hopefully make it a little bit more robust, really. But anyway, look, I've got to move on to the next question.
We could talk about 3D printing all day.
So look, I mean, the other thing as well there. The other reason I was really, really keen to have you on the channel, Alex, was because of your occupation, the fact that you work in archaeology, which is something that I just find fascinating. I know that you've got a really strong historical focus on the channel as well. Put out some really interesting historical content that I very much enjoy. So so tell us a little bit more about the archaeology. And also as well, if you wouldn't mind, at the same time, what's the relationship between the archaeology and the wargaming? Does one inform the other?
Well, I'll give you my background in archaeology first of all, I guess, and then I can move on to the other stuff. Yeah, well, I started in archaeology probably when I was about 15, really. I went on a day excavation here in my local town here in Rotherham. I was always interested in history anyway as a kid, always interested in archaeology and never actually done any physical stuff. But then I went out and did an excavation. I wasn't doing a great deal. I was basically, shoved into a corner and cleaning up a bit of a trench, but I thought it was great,
Yeah.
And then I ended up going to night class and doing an archaeology GCSE class and just thinking, oh, this is, really interesting again. It was a bit after I was left school because I didn't leave with any A levels or anything at school, I had a handful of GCSEs and not much else. I just messed about a bit. And then I went to this night class when I was in my early 20s and I realized again how much I really enjoyed archaeology, how interested I was. And then that led on to doing the AS level in archaeology and also doing an access course at college, which then got me into university at York. When I think I was, how old was I? 20. I'm trying to think now. 24 when I went to university finally. So I was what's called a mature student. There's not much in it. It was 6 years, but yeah, quite a bit of difference between somebody being out of university and going straight from school. And then really, I really enjoyed the academic side of it, but I more enjoyed the actual physical digging side of it. That's really what I wanted to be into. And every chance I got during the summer holidays, whilst at university, I basically jumped on any excavation that was going. There's always research digs and things. So anything that was happening. Now, I actually got a chance to go out to Japan as well during that time, do some digging out there for a month, which was fantastic. All we had to do was pay the flights. The rest of it was paid for by Toyama University. And we were me and a few mates were basically excavating with 30 odd Japanese students. Brilliant, talking about
experience,
cultural clashes. It was great, really, really good fun. And I got to visit Hiroshima as well because I thought, if I'm going to Japan, I'll probably never come back, and I'm going to make sure I go to Hiroshima. So I did made the pilgrimage, I suppose you could call it, down to Hiroshima. Got to see that. But then after that, I graduated in 2001. And it was during the foot and mouth crisis. I don't know if you remember that, when basically the countryside closed down.
Yeah,
we all remember.
Deja vu.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was just the countryside that time. But yeah, it was. So basically, just put the kibosh on everything. We archaeologists, because a lot of the work is out in fields and things, for developments. So there was just no real work. Developments weren't happening, and I was kind of stuck, but it was also the time that a load of money was being pushed into Ireland during what they call the Celtic Tiger boom from the EU to build motorways. And they were just crying out for archaeologists because we're building so much infrastructure. And me and a couple of mates, we applied to a company, and this was like on Thursday afternoon, and they said, oh, can you start on Monday? Like, this is us still living in York, It's like, whoa. So we got the weekend to get across there, And then I went there really just to get some experience because at the time a lot of archaeology units were saying they wanted people with 6 months experience field work. I had about 3 months experience. So I thought, well, if I build it up another 3 or 4 months, I can, come back to Britain and work in the UK. 4 years later, I finally came back to Britain because I was having so much fun in Ireland that it was just like a non-stop party,
Yeah.
And there was just tons and tons of work. You could go from one site to another with no problems at all. And to be honest, I actually got out just before the financial crash of 2008, which again had a massive impact on Ireland because all the money dried up, all the infrastructure developments dried up, which meant all the archaeology stuff dried up.
Yeah.
But then since then, I've really just worked in the UK. Well, not just UK. Where else have I worked? I worked in Iceland for a year. As an archaeologist, that was an interesting experience. I worked in Singapore for half a year as well with an exploded ordnance company, doing the survey before they were clearing out an old British airbase, which has which led on to my interest in the Malayan campaign. I'm sure I'll talk about that at some point in
Well,
this.
again, yes, the topic of some fantastic YouTube videos as well.
Yeah, it's one of the things I keep going back to. It's a really interesting little campaign now, and I knew very little about it until I actually went and worked in Singapore and learnt a lot more about it and realised how much of a blow to Britain it was losing Singapore and that entire campaign. You know,
Yeah,
on both sides, crazy. But so yeah, I worked over there for a while. I'm trying to think of where else. I've worked in France and Belgium a lot, as well as a battlefield archaeologist. And that has been on First World War sites. So that started in, our first one was in 2003, a place called Ocean Villas. I'd just gone to a conference, a battlefield archaeology conference, and one of the guys from this project was talking about Ocean Villas as a project, and he said it was a volunteer thing. So I just went up and talked to him afterwards. I said, look, I'm an archaeologist. I'd be interested in coming along. And to be honest, I had a bit of an interest in the First World War, but not a great interest at the time. You know, I knew about it. I'd read a little bit about it. I learned a little about it at school, which turns out it was all, you know, all wrong anyway, but that's another story. But, you know, I was there and I went there for a week, just turned up at this little village in France. What it is, it's a tea room owned by this woman called Avril Williams. If anyone's ever been to the Somme, they've probably been to Ocean Villas tea rooms.
I think I've been there as well.
You probably have. If you've seen the trench in the back garden, that's the trench that we were excavating.
Right. Okay.
So I worked on that back in 2003, and then we did that. And I was working away on the last day, and I think it was last-ish day, and I was working away with a mattock, and I just hit the section just to clean it up, and about 1,303 bullets just fell out of the section in front of me. And I was like, I'm in heaven. This is the best. This is literally the best thing I could ever be doing right now. And that really led on to doing all the other First World War archaeology I've done since. And I think, apart from this year, or maybe one or two other years, every year I've been able to get out to France and do some excavation on some sites at least. I've worked on quite a few different sites in France and Belgium. So we did, the team that I was working with at Ocean Villas, we went on to do a couple of TV programs. There was one now based at Serre, which we did, where we found our first human remains, and we were able to name a couple of them, German soldiers. Yeah. And then we also went on to work for another TV company, Finding the Fallen. That we did 2 full series of that and an extra, the one of Vimy. And that was mostly Canadian sites that we were working on, but we worked on, I worked it out a little while ago. I think I've worked on about 20 different First World War sites in France and Belgium. So it's quite a lot. You know, a lot of people may only end up working on one if they ever get a chance to. So I've been quite lucky in that respect. And the fact that we were getting paid to do it as well for the TV was great. I mean, you know, we were enjoying doing it anyway, you know, but it was a bit of a holiday, but then to also get paid as well for a while. And we were...
I feel very ignorant around the First World War, I must admit. You know, I suppose my interest was always predominantly Second World War as I was growing up. And it's only really been, I suppose, quite recently, I've started to hear people put forward alternative perspectives, alternative viewpoints on the First World War. I'm reading one of Professor Gary Sheffield's books at the moment, which is just incredibly eye-opening.
Which one? Forgotten Victory?
That's the one.
That's my go-to book. Whenever anybody asks about the First World War, I just say read Forgotten Victory, and you're straight in it. Like that's revisionist history all over. It's the perfect introduction to it. It was really, really good, well written, and absolutely, you know, like you say, eye-opening.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I read the Martin Gilbert single volume some time ago, which was a good narrative history.
Yeah,
but it just didn't really have as many dimensions to it, I suppose, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting as well, because to hear people like Two Fat Lardys talk about the First World War as well, they're very passionate about it as almost like this sort of crucible of innovation where
absolutely
things are changing so quickly.
Yeah.
obviously created so many challenges for the people that were involved in the conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just one of those things that I hadn't really appreciated before.
It's a real strange thing that, you know, war gamers just don't pick up on the First World War. They're literally stuck in a stalemate of, you know, thinking that the trenches is all it is. And even the trenches, there's plenty of ways of playing games based around those. In the fighting in 1918, you just say there, you know, was basically the fighting in 1940. It's pretty much the same. You know, if you're doing 1940 campaigns, you can easily transplant them 20 years earlier to 1918 because of the so-called war of movement. But the tactics that they were using were very similar. They were, you know, very fire of movement, using light machine guns to keep the enemy down, and then moving in with bayonets and things. It was, you know, very similar kind of tactical training. You've got to think there's only 20 years between the First and the Second World Wars. You know,
Yes.
and everything that they were using in the Second World War comes directly from 1916 onwards, really. But it's a blind spot for wargamers. It really is.
Yeah,
So
no,
I'm trying to change it.
well, yeah, and I exactly fell into that sort of stereotypical view of how I perceived it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I was interested in aspects of it, like, for example, the air war. I always
Yeah.
probably informed by reading too many Biggles books.
There's nothing wrong with that.
But yeah, so that, I mean, that changing perspective on that conflict is something that I do find really interesting. And yeah, and there are some
actually, I did Gary Sheffield's MA course a few years ago in British First World War history, really off the back of doing the archaeology. So I've been doing that for, you know, nearly 10 years at that point, and I thought, well, I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. And what I learned from that course is how much I didn't know about the First World War. You know, despite having worked on battlefield archaeology and reading loads of First World War books in the 10 years prior to that, as soon as I started to do it at a high academic level, I just realized that there is so much more to it than, you know, the usual stuff that you'd pick up. Like, I was thinking, you know, Alan Clark's The Donkeys. It's one of the books that most people know of when you talk about the First World War, or even A.J.P. Taylor's The Illustrated First World War. Both of those are ones that, you know, are taught in schools, and both of them are they just do not stand up to scrutiny whatsoever. You know, they're of their time. They're very polemic. You know, there's holes in the histories of both of those. You know, absolutely. I mean, Taylor's a great historian, but he's completely failing on the First World War in that book. But it's one of the things that a lot of people know about. You know, and then you get stuff like Blackadder. Oh, What a Lovely War. All this stuff all feeds in from A.J.P. Taylor and from Clark, you know, and people seem to think it's like, you know, this is the true history, and it's like it takes. I used to get really angry about people posting stuff like this, especially during the centenary. You know, like saying the general sitting in the chateaus eating foie gras or whatever. You know, it's like, well, where do you think Monty was during Arnhem? He was just because he was in his caravan. He was pulled up in his chateau grounds. You know, he wasn't any better or worse. You know, he wasn't a frontline general. Why would you have a general on the front lines anyway? You know, it's crazy. But I'm ranting.
No, I mean, I mean, it's a fascinating subject, and I mean, my wife is a history teacher, and so we had a fantastic week in France several years ago. Going around the battlefields and doing the tours and everything like that. One of the things that's quite amazing is just how much is still there, really, given the passage of time. And all the subsequent events as well. I mean, I suppose the other thing I just wanted to sort of mention about the First World War is that actually there's so much more to it than the Western Front as well.
Oh yeah, of course there is. Yeah,
and that's one of the areas again where, you know, I really want to find out more. You know, I'd love to find. I really would like to read more about the German invasion of Russia, and that is, you know, that's to me it's the most fascinating aspect of the Second World War. And I would very, very much like to read more about that experience in the First World War as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, English language books on the on the Eastern Front in the First World War are very hard to come by. That's the problem, really. They just need somebody to sit down and actually do it. But you know, whether the archives still remain in Russia or not, it's I don't know. They probably got destroyed in the Second World War, I would have thought, but you know, maybe there's something that people can still use today. I don't know, but there's very few books that I've come across that, you know, are on the Eastern Front in the Second World War. Same with the Italian front in the First World War as well. You know, there's very little written in English about that as well, which is ridiculous, really, because there was a lot of British units that fought on the Italian front. So it would be interesting to follow some of their histories as well, you know, as opposed to, like you say, the Western Front. I mean, there's a massive, you know, there's a huge amount of work done on the Western Front, but even then, how much do we get to see about the French?
Well, absolutely. I mean, but again, you know, the Italian campaign, you know, some of the, is it the Po Valley, and you know, and didn't Rommel write his infantry tactics book?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, you just think, well, that would make an amazing campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a war gamer, it would be a fantastic thing to try, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's perfect for it, really. It's crying out. Well, I know that the two fat Lardys have covered it in one of their supplements for Through the Mud and Blood. They talk about, I think there's only a couple of scenarios in the Stout Hearts and Iron Troops. I don't know if you've seen that. It's their following. It's basically a scenario book for Through the Mud and Blood. Could quite easily be used for Chain of Command First World War as well, if you wanted to. But yes, there's a couple of Rommel things in there. Yeah, that's one of the things I want to do, is more Chain of Command in First World War as well.
No, well, I mean, we sort of seem to be wandering back into the world of wargaming again now.
We didn't know.
So you know, again, I want to go back to the second part of my question that I put to you, Alex. You know, how do you find your archaeology influences your wargaming, and vice versa, or is it just a case of never the twain shall meet?
Well, there's definitely crossover. I mean, you know, now, like I say, I got into the First World War largely through doing archaeology on the First World War, and then as I realised that there was more to the First World War than I previously thought, even from a wargaming point of view, that kind of influenced me to get into things like square bashing and stuff. And I just, you know, I wanted to get more First World War wargaming done off the back of working, you know, literally on sites, or First World War sites. So he definitely fed into my interests as a wargamer. Because like you said, I mean, one of the things I was always interested in was the aerial warfare anyway, in the First World War. So I got a lot of the Wings of War stuff, and now Wings of Glory, as it's called. That was the worst acronym you could ever think of, but you know, just think about the marketing, please. But so I, you know, I was always into the First World War aircraft stuff, and I always thought that's the kind of where the wargaming is. But then, as I was learning more about the war on the ground as well, I was thinking, well, you know, there's ways and means of dealing with this from a wargaming point of view as well. You know, like there's plenty of skirmishes or small battles that don't have to be the, you know, the big things. Like you don't have to just do the Somme offensive. You can do like the Australian attack on Pozières and things. You know, that's almost like a Second World War battle fighting through a ruined village. You know, so yeah, it definitely fed in from that point of view. I've never really been massively interested in ancients or anything. So a lot of the archaeology I've done in the UK, at least, has always, you know, has been Roman, Iron Age, Bronze Age, some 19th century stuff from in Sheffield and things. But that's never really informed me as a wargamer, because I've never particularly been interested in ancient stuff. I got more interested in now with Infamy coming out, just because I wanted to see.
I was going to say that you've been painting some fantastic 15mm Romans recently. So
yeah, Romans and Gauls. The cat wants to come in. She can wait.
Cat or the other one?
That's Tiny. That cat's asleep upstairs somewhere, I think. But yeah, the reason I wanted to play Infamy was because of my love for Asterix. And so, I got goals because I wanted Asterix style goals, and I painted up the Romans in the Asterix Roman style, not the traditional, red tunics and things that you normally see. So I thought, well, green, and so yeah, that was literally why I got into Infamy. So it's not, my primary reading for that is the Travels with Asterix, those books, rather than
timeless classics.
So yeah, but that's about the earliest I would probably do, and that's from an archaeological point of view. Again, really, with the infamy stuff, one of the first sites I ever worked on was a place called Castell Henllys in Wales, where it's an Iron Age roundhouse village, and they reconstructed some of the roundhouses. So I don't know if you saw recently the video that I did of the roundhouses that I got from hovels.
Yes, I did.
I did those specifically because I'd worked at Castell Henllys, and it was like it's a way of recreating, some of my first archaeological works on the tabletop. So yes, some of it bleeds in. There is obviously some crossover here and there.
Yeah.
And now I work for the Ministry of Defence as an archaeologist. So now I have access to the military training ranges and things. And my interest in military archaeology anyway, and 20th century archaeology in particular, that really helps when it comes to making scenery and things, or just doing any kind of stuff that is wargaming. So, I'm always looking at, pillboxes and bunkers and things on the ranges. So, I have an idea of how these things are meant to look. And also, as I mentioned, I was in Singapore as well. That wasn't strictly archaeology, but I was there through archaeology because I was there doing geophysical survey, which is an archaeological tool. We were looking for bombs, not archaeology. And then that's being there for 6 months. That just basically gave me the whole eye opener on the Malayan campaign, which you've seen. I'm sure you've seen the videos of me replaying the Malayan campaign, and we've been refighting it for about the last 6 years, I think, me and my mates. But we were doing it with rapid fire, and now more latterly with Iron Being Shot Mum and with Chain of Command. So that fed directly into my wargaming. I was reading about this stuff. I was visiting the battlefields and learning more about it while I was there in Singapore. And I I'm sure you're the same. You read something or you see a film and you just think, how would that look on a tabletop? And that's exactly.
I find, my enjoyment of history is one of the absolute key facets of what drives my interest in wargaming, really. And, And I often find that the types of games I'm interested in playing are the types of periods and the types of subjects I'm interested from a historical view. But how I find my hobby is now kind of trying influencing that is that I'll often see something maybe on Twitter or maybe on the interwebs and think, well, that's fantastic. Ken Riley's doing some fantastic stuff with his 20.
Every time those people post stuff, I'm like, more and more of my things just go in the bin. It's like, what's the point?
but then I find if I can enjoy the history, I enjoy the project that much more. So over the course of the last few months, I've really, really become interested in the AWI, and I've read really, really quite broadly about it now.
Yeah.
And because I've got that historical understanding, I enjoy the wargaming more.
I think, the two definitely feed into each other. The more you understand about the actual background of it. So I find it as well, because sometimes I'll play games with my mates and they're into other different periods and things. Like I said, my mate's into the Spanish Civil War. I really know very little about it. I've read Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, and I know my great uncle was a commissar in the International Brigade, but that's literally as much as I know about it. He was one of my heroes, and he actually came up in my mate. He made a card with Tommy James, my great uncle, who gives a patriotic speech and raises your morale. But it kind of left me a little bit cold just because I don't know anything about the period. And then you're kind of just playing a game, I think, and it feels like, well, you kind of could be doing anything. But because I know more about the First War and the Second War and the Napoleonic War, you can kind of just add a little bit onto it, a little bit of flesh onto that stuff. You know, like you said, the AWI. Again, I know zero about it. I know it happened. I've got a rough idea of when it happened, who was involved, but that's literally it. You know, and to me, playing that, I think I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much, but maybe playing a game of it might prompt me to go and at least get an introductory book and just think, right, okay, you know, what am I actually doing here? And you know, to me, the history is as important as the gaming, which is why I like historical gaming. And as you say, you know, there's always something that comes up and you see it, you think, oh, that looks fantastic. I could really do with that kind of thing. Which is, I suppose, why I'm not really interested in fantasy so much, because, you know, to me, just, you know, it's literally somebody just sat down and wrote it. I'm not that fussed about it. But then, you know, I do like some fantasy as well. So like Star Wars and Judge Dredd and H.P. Lovecraft stuff, you know. So I can't say that about everything.
I mean, given all the discussion recently about the state of the hobby, and I know you've posted your own views on the health of the hobby, but as we're talking about the kind of the historical aspects of it, do you think that that's a hurdle for people trying to engage with historical wargaming? I mean, it strikes me that in many cases there's so much assumed knowledge that takes place. It can sometimes, I should imagine, be really quite daunting for somebody who's got a fledgling interest in the hobby. Yeah, how do you think that's a factor, and is it something that we need to consider or try to do something about?
I think it is a factor, to be honest. I mean, I've given this a lot of thought, and I keep coming up with different answers every day, really. So today's answer. But yeah, I think it is a bit of a hurdle. But generally, people who play historical games are probably people who are going to be interested in history anyway, I would say. So they're already over that bit of, you know, getting involved in it, or, you know, or wanting to. It might be that they're gaming a different period that they're used to. So, but they can still, you know, you've still got lessons from history that you can always put back anyway, further back in history. You know, some things don't change, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But say for somebody, let's just say somebody who's ever known, all they've ever known is Games Workshop, fantasy. It might be a bit of a shift in gears from going from, you know, having it all provided for you to shifting into something like maybe the Second World War. But then that said, there's plenty of games like Bolt Action, Flames of War. These are just ones I'm looking out of my head at the moment. What's the other one? Battle Group. That have those big glossy books, and they are actually, you know, whether we see them as specifically something like Bolt Action or Flames of War, whether we see it as you know, purely historical, there's probably enough history in those, background history and introductory stuff, that gets a new player interested in it, at least at a very basic level.
Yeah,
you know, they do go, they are at pains to, you know, talk about the conflicts that you're refighting. Same stuff like things like Black Powder and things like that, and the Hail Caesar and things.
Yeah.
And I think there's quite a few. There are quite a few rules out there that do assume that you already know that you already know the history. But then the issue with some of those rules, because they're the smaller producers, like I'll name them, like the two Fat Lardys, like say for instance Chain of Command. There isn't a history of the Second World War in Chain of Command. However, there is in the supplements.
Yes.
There's tons of really good research in the supplements, but in the core rules, you know, they are the rules. And I can understand why. It's because there you've got the issue of the printing prices, of, you know, putting too much information into a book and how much it's going to cost. You know, if one person like Rich producing these things, he's, you know, he can only put out so much. So I can understand why things are left out in those. Whereas, like, you know, Warlord Games, who are a big company, they're able to produce larger, huger amounts of units, so they're getting them cheaper anyway, so they can make bigger units. Units of books I'm talking about, rather than figure units.
Yeah.
so they can, you know, pack a lot more into that information wise, you know. So the short and the long is, yes, it's a hurdle, but I think there's quite a few companies that are at least addressing it, you know, and I know that certainly stuff like Bolt Action, for instance, and Flames of War, they're kind of like one-stop shops, aren't
Yeah.
they, where they want that funnel of the person to come in and buy all their stuff, which, you know, we know you don't have to, but
No,
obviously,
and I mean, I've only returned to the hobby, I suppose, in the last 2 years.
mm,
Um, and for me, as a returning gamer, yeah, Flames of War was the rule set that I first became interested in,
yeah,
because I suppose the mechanics were similar enough to the things that I could remember from my teenage years. You know,
yeah,
they were vaguely Warhammer 40k-ish, which I could vaguely remember,
yeah,
and the concepts of saving throws and this kind of thing. So it enabled me to return to the hobby, you know, and then yes, subsequently I moved on, and the interest has become much broader. But really, I suppose in many respects, it serves its purpose, and
absolutely,
and you
absolutely,
know, and I think we need to have a much less, perhaps as a hobby, a much less snobbish view of these types of rule sets, because I
yeah,
think they
yeah.
play a really, really important part in attracting people into the hobby who've perhaps left it, or who want to get into historical specifically.
Hmm.
There's got to be some entry point, hasn't
Yeah,
there?
absolutely. I 100% agree. I mean, I think, you know, I don't play Flames of War. I don't play Bolt Action because they don't interest me. I'm not, you know, I'm not bothered about them. But if somebody comes along, you know, some teenager or 20 odd year old comes along, picks up that book, reads it, plays a game, and then from that picks up, you know, a history book on the Second World War, on anything, you know, even just an introductory thing, then fantastic, job done as far as I'm concerned, you know, and that's what we want. Like you say, there's no point being snobbish about these things, and because, you know, you can look down your nose at any rule set. If you don't like it, don't play it. You know, it serves a purpose, like you say, it serves a purpose for getting people interested in the hobby, and I see it too often. Really, you do see people that occasionally say things like, "Oh, people don't read history anymore." I mean, people have been saying that for the last 40 years. You know,
Yeah,
there is always going to be people who read history. That's always going to, you know, kids are. There will always be that kid in the class who's a little bit more interested than the rest of them. And you know, when I was at school, it was me. I was the one that was reading about the Second World War after
yeah.
class. You know, there's always going to be somebody who wants to take it a little further, and they're the ones that you kind of got to hook. And if that means, you know, Warlord Games selling them Bolt Action and then them painting
Yeah,
up, you know, 28 mil figures for 20 quid or whatever, fantastic, brilliant, you know, they're in.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then they can explore it wider from there as long as they want to, you know, as far as I'm concerned. But like
Yeah.
you say, you've got to have that entry point. And if not,
All right.
it's garden
So,
walling,
so,
isn't it? And gatekeeping.
so talking about entry points, then, in going back to the earlier comment, yeah, fantastic. There's a fantastic range of First World War miniatures out there now. Yeah, there really is some quite astounding stuff.
Mm.
But where would you start around rule books, Alex? This is one of the things I've struggled with. Where would you, if I was in, well, I'm interested in getting into the First World War. I'd like to get a rule set that's going to be fairly easy for me to get into, and interesting in terms of its mechanics. Yeah, where do I start?
Well, again, because the First World War is so, you know, it's literally the Second World War's little brother. There's
Mm,
not a great deal of sets out there. Great War Spearhead, I've never played it, but I know a lot of people do, and they do say it's very good. Um, I do keep meaning to have a look at it myself at some point. Um, so I'm not sure if I could recommend it because I've never played it, but I know it. So that might be one worthwhile looking at. The ones that I play, Two Fat Lardies Through the Mud and Blood, is
yeah,
good. However, there's a but. It's quite an old set of rules,
mm,
so it's a similar level as the command, but Chain of Command is basically better than it. and can
Right.
still be used in the First World War setting. And I know there's a First World War version of Chain of Command in one of the Lardy specials, which I've used myself.
Oh, interesting.
So that's worthwhile. I think it might be the 2015 Christmas special. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. But it's certainly in there. So if you have a look for that. Yeah, Chain of Command can be used very easily for the First World War. The other one that I would definitely recommend is Square Bash by Peter Pig, or Rules for the Common Man, which is, it's basically for 15 mil figures, but you can use anything. You could use 6 mil. If I was doing it again, I'd do it in 6. And that's battalion level. So your smallest unit is a battalion. So it's quite a large scale game, and it's all done on squares. And it's only on a 3 foot by 4 foot table as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a small table. It's half the size of your normal wargaming table if you use a 6x4. And it's always giving us great results. It's a really good game. It's really innovative in the way it plays. It's just interesting, and it's perfect for fighting the First World War from 1914 all the way through to 18. And the wars either side of it as well. And there's lists for all that stuff. There's the 2 books. There's the main rules, and then you've also got the army book as well, which has the lists and things. There's a really interesting pre-game section, which simulates the week before and what you're doing, basically, doing a small attacks and things, or softening up with artillery and stuff like that. And that's a really interesting little innovative pre-game thing as well. We don't play it that often, but when we do it, it's always interesting, because then it decides who is going to attack and who is going to defend, how much you've got and how much you haven't got on the table. And then when you're on the table, the defender also gets splattered by artillery, so then they have depletion. So not only you put your forces out, but then they'll not be the full force that you had anyway. So yeah, some real nice little innovations in it. It's well worth. The problem is with Peter Pig stuff is sometimes it's very difficult to actually unpick what they're trying to say in the rules.
Interpretation.
That's not a criticism of the rules at all, but it is a criticism of the writing sometimes. But once you get it and once you played it a couple of times, it soon settles in your head, and it's a really interesting, innovative, fantastic set of rules.
It's interesting that it sort of seems to touch on some of those kind of often ignored aspects, like things like possibly logistics and things like that as well.
Yeah,
exactly. Sounds very much like a sort of an operational level war game in that regard.
Yeah. There's another set that I got recently that I've still yet to try out, called Only Playing Leapfrog, and that is set at core level. And what it is, it almost ignores the actual fighting. It's more about the core commanders asking for reinforcements in their particular sector. You're playing as basically against artificial intelligence enemy as core commanders, and you're trying to get towards your objectives while the other ones are doing the same thing, but you're trying to get the tanks that they're asking for, and the overall commander decides who gets what. Again, it's really badly written, so I've not actually sat down and played it, because it's so hard to swim through the rules. It's quite difficult, but it's an interesting little set of rules. So I suppose there's 4 that but I'd definitely go for the square bashing, and I'd look at the if you're familiar with Chain of Command anyway, I'd look at the First World War version of Chain of Command. It works well.
Well, thanks for that, because I heard you chatting to Sean on God's Own Scale podcast about it.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I thought, I want to find out a little bit more about that. That sounds really interesting. So thank you for that.
No problem.
And also as well, just before we kind of move on a bit, can you please just tell us a little bit about the work that you do with the veterans in regards to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. With Operation Nightingale, that's something else. Back end of the archaeology that we keep sliding away from. This Op Nightingale is a Ministry of Defence program of works, basically, archaeological works. It was set up by my boss, Richard Osgood, who is my line manager at the ministry. Well, Defence Infrastructure Organisation is our real name, but nobody's ever heard of us, so we call ourselves. Well, it's easier to say Ministry of Defence because people know that. But basically, one of our roles is he set it up in 2011, and it was basically to help veterans suffering from things like PTSD and from physical injuries, basically just help them on a pathway to recovery through archaeology. Because archaeology, you really need to concentrate on what you're doing. You can kind of lose yourself, because there's a lot of small level work, just the physical work of it and just being outside and things. It really helps a lot of these guys with what they're going through. It kind of just helps them forget about things for a little while. No, I'm not going to say it's not a cure, because that would be facile to say that, but it helps guys on their pathways to recovery. It's just a thing that's helping them feel better and get better. And what we do is, as part of this, our role in the MOD is basically to set up projects, because there's only 4 archaeologists in the MOD. We set up projects across the MOD estate, and then we contact a company, generally work with a company called Breaking Ground Heritage, which is a company set up by Dickie Bennett, who is an ex-Royal Marine Sergeant and veteran. And he set up Breaking Ground Heritage on the back of coming to an Operation Nightingale project. And what his role is in Breaking Ground Heritage is basically to gather the veterans to ensure that all their welfare is taken care of, to vet them in the first place, to make sure they're I suppose a proper state of mind to be able to be involved in one of these projects. And then he comes to the sites with us and basically works and deals with the veterans on site, ensuring they're fed and watered and things. A bit difficult during the COVID times, but in the past we've done it. And what he's been doing as well is also giving them questionnaires. So at the start of the project, and then also at the end of the project, and basically asking, how do you feel about self-isolation? How do you feel about self-worth? Lots and lots of questions, that they give tick boxes through. And he uses this as data. It's all anonymized, so, we don't know who he's come from. But he uses all this data to actually, to see how well the progress is, even just throughout 2 weeks that they're on site. And pretty much every single one of them has shown an improvement in well-being, in losing a sense of worthlessness, in isolation, all those things. It's actually increased. And as I say, it's not, they don't come out of it perfect. Of course not. Nobody does. When you're suffering from severe mental trauma, but it does help them. But also by giving them vocational skills. And we've actually had a couple of the guys as well who've gone to university off the back of Operation Nightingale projects, and they're now working in commercial archaeology full-time as archaeologists. So they've not only, taken their interest from those couple of weeks, but actually gone on to do field work, full-time and get paid for it as well, which again is brilliant. Some of them just want to do it as a bit of a hobby, as a something that they're interested in. But some of them, the guys we were talking to last week, one of them was saying he was interested in going to university. So, maybe he'll be there in a year or so.
Well, I mean, that must be an incredibly rewarding aspect of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, we, from our role in the MOD, is really just setting these projects up, and then once they're in place, we're hands off. We have a contractor come in to do the actual archaeology and write the reports and make sure everything's done properly and teach people how to do stuff, because most people on these sites don't have any archaeological experience whatsoever. And then we also have Breaking Ground Heritage, who look after the veterans whilst they're on site. So, it's a fantastic thing, but I can't take very little credit for it, because we're just facilitating the work to go ahead. It's everybody else that puts in the hard work to make sure everybody else is doing well. Really, I just go and tell crap jokes, And
yeah. Well,
try to go on.
I'm sure that helps in some way.
Yeah, they're all
I know,
united in hatred.
but I mean, there are quite a number of prominent veteran war gamers. You know, I'm thinking about Jay Arnold and his podcast, obviously, and I was watching a video from a channel called Check Your Leader TV.
Oh yeah,
They're talking about their experiences of being a veteran and also a war gamer.
yeah,
So I suppose those links are really quite natural and understandable. And I know that obviously the likes of Henry Hyde is very keen to talk about the positive mental health aspects of.
yeah, definitely.
And again, I mean, I think that's possibly something to be celebrated. I don't know enough about it to be able to really discuss it. But I just think it's another really interesting aspect of the hobby and what we do, really.
Yeah. Well, with the Ob Nightingale stuff, a lot of the sites that we work on are military sites, not only because they're on the ranges, but we, for the last few years, we've been working out in Bullecourt in France as well, again with veterans and Operation Nightingale. And you've got that real link, you know, of the soldiers of the past and the soldiers of today, you know, and to them, it's something that they can tune into very quickly, you know, and it's that's something that is also interesting for them as much as anything else. You know, they're more interested in the military stuff than they would be, you know, like a Bronze Age funerary cairn or something, you know. So we try to find interesting military archaeology things, which is great for me because I like military archaeology anyway, you know.
Well, look, so just one final question then on the archaeology. If I was to say, Alex, here you go, endless budget, where would you go in the world? What would be your dream dig? You must have one.
Well, what I'd like to do is start digging the trenches in Belgium, on the Belgian coast, and work all the way down to Switzerland and excavate the entire length of the Western Front. Now, given that there was over 500 miles of trenches, I think it'd take a little while, but there's plenty of sites probably in France. I couldn't think of anyone in particular, just off the top of my head, but I would love to buy a plot of land in France on the front line somewhere, probably on the Somme somewhere, and just completely excavate the trenches. One of the things we did as a part of the team was excavating the trenches at TFR Woods. I don't know if you've visited those at all with the schools. Yeah, those trenches, I dug them, along with the team as well. It wasn't just me. But yeah, we worked on that, and that was a fantastic project, and that went on for nearly 10 years. And I'd like to do something like that, I think, but I can't think. I wouldn't be able to say. I'd be happy to dig any of the First World War sites because I just love the First World War stuff. But I think I'd probably put the money into Bullecourt because that's the project we've been working on for the last few years. And funding dried up this year, unfortunately. But we're hoping to get back next year and the year after if we can, obviously, COVID permitting. But I think I'll put the money into that at this point, just so I know it would go ahead. But any more work we could do out there would be great as well. But yes, any First World War sites is a bit of a flimsy answer, but you know.
No. Well, I think you've cheated a little bit by just saying the entirety of the Western Front.
Yeah, there you go.
That's me more as a lifestyle choice than a dig.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But of course, I'm too old to dig anyway, so I'd have somebody else digging it for me. I'd just be watching.
Well, so coming right up to date now, I suppose, really, I just wanted to sort of like my last few questions, really, are on a bit of a current theme at the moment that's been stirred up's not necessarily the right word, but it's sort of come to prominence because of two things, really, which I suppose is the WSS 2020 survey, which always seems to have people kind of gnashing their teeth to an extent.
Yeah.
And also the video by Little Wars TV about the state of the hobby. And I know that this is something that you've done a video on your channel about, so you obviously have a view.
My God, the views went through the roof on that, honestly. It's mad. So I mean, how just sort of summarise your response to Alex and your feelings, because I do have some more questions on this, but just give us where do you stand? Well, the question was, is historical wargaming dying? And my answer, a very short, two-letter answer, is no. It isn't. Far from it. I mean, you know, from their point of view, I think the question is a little bit clickbaity, you know, and and it certainly was on my channel because, you know, like I say, the views of that video went through the roof compared to the other stuff around it. But I don't think they interviewed quite a lot of people from the industry, shall we call it? You know, Sam Mustafa, the Rich from Too Fat Lardies, Henry Hyde, a few other guys from various other things. And what I noticed from their video, and I'm sure everybody else noticed as well, there's a massive divide between America and Europe, shall we say, or the rest of the world. America were saying, yes, it's dying. The rest of the world was saying, no, it's fantastic. It's in rude health. It's really good. You know, we're spoiled for choice. And I think it really depends on which side of the Atlantic you are on.
Yeah.
Is what your answer is going to be.
Well, it'd be interesting as well to get some Canadian perspectives as well, because obviously North America isn't just America.
No, of course, yeah.
And you know, and certainly some of the content producers that are online, some of the most prolific ones are Canadian.
Yeah, definitely.
And it'd be interesting to see what the scene is like over the border there in perhaps a little bit more depth.
Yeah, definitely. I think Canada was definitely left out of it. And, well, you know, the rest of the world as well, you know, the non-English speaking world as well was, I mean, you know, what is it like in Australia? I think we probably both follow Stephen, the old wargamer, on Twitter, and he doesn't ever seem to be. He's always playing games, so you know it seems as though it's not dead in Australia. I mean, I can imagine in America you might feel a little isolated just because you've got, you know, the area is such a vast area to go back and forth from to go and get the game, and they think nothing of traveling through hours to go and play a game, you know, for an afternoon or a weekend. Whereas here in the UK, obviously, you know, most of us in most big towns, you've got a wargaming club that you can join. You know, I went to one for the first time in 20 years just last week, 20 minutes away from my house, you know.
Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time?
It's a long story. I'll not go into it. There was various issues, and there'd been some sad news, so it wasn't really the time to go and join the club, okay, shall we say. I'll say no more about that, but I'm going to go back this week, I think, and hopefully it'll be a little better. But yeah, I've been to wargaming clubs in the past, you know, and always enjoyed them as well. And it's just because I've moved around as an archaeologist, I've always played with my mates anyway, really.
Yeah.
But you know, even here in Sheffield, I'm just thinking now that I can think of probably 3 places within 20 minutes that I could reach that are vibrant wargaming clubs, and they're all historical as well.
Yeah,
you know, and that's not even, I could walk 5 minutes into town and I'd be at Games Workshop. So if I wanted to go and play Games Workshop stuff, I could just nip down there, you know. So from my point of view, I'm absolutely drenched in wargaming. And also, I just think as well.
That's an interesting metaphor.
It is. It's the only thing I can think of. I don't know, covered in, drenched in. But yeah, I mean, you know, you can get around, and I think that's probably similar for a lot of big cities or towns, at least. I mean, I'm, you know, fortunate in that I live in Rotherham and I'm close to Sheffield. I could even go out to Doncaster and add to that list, and I'm sure there's plenty of wargaming clubs in Doncaster as well. It's a little further away, but you know, if I needed to, I could get there. Whereas in America, you know, if you're living in the middle of nowhere, you know, getting to a wargaming club is obviously going to be pretty difficult if you don't drive for the first instance, and they're obviously just a lot wider spread apart, you know, and that's why I think this has come up again a lot in a lot of the discussions, is that the wargaming shows that you go to, there's some of the follow-on discussions, the wargaming shows that you go to in the UK, they're more like trade shows where you'd go and do a lot of shopping rather than actually game, although there are participation games. Whereas in the US, they go to game, they go specifically to play as many games as they can in that weekend or whatever, you know, and because they just can't get games anywhere else. So you can see the difference there, I think.
Yeah. But I think the geography must play an enormous
role. Yeah, It has to. It really has to. You know, and I've come across it a lot in the comments and stuff on my videos and things about just people saying, you know, where do I get a game and stuff, and invariably the people in America who, if you don't play the local game in the local hobby shop, then it's difficult to do something. But I always think as well, you know, this is partially on the people as well. Like if you want to play a game, take it along. You know, one of the things that we do with my mates, myself and my mates, is we will play anything, but we all insist on, if you want to introduce a new game to the group, we call it, the three of us, then you basically have to supply both sides. Which is why, you know, I have pretty much every nation under the sun for the Second World War, and I've got British and Germans for the First World War. We don't just collect one army, you know, both armies, so that, you know, there's no, you're not waiting for somebody else to paint up their army, or, you know, so like for infamy, I've got the Romans and I've got the Gauls, so we're ready to go with that anytime they want to come around and play it. You know, I'm not waiting for Dean to paint his Romans for 8 years or whatever, you know. So that's kind of our unwritten rule. And so I think if people were more inclined to do that kind of thing, just to provide everything, like, so say, you know, let's just say people were playing bolt action, you weren't big into bolt action, you like chain of command. If you took this stuff down to the local club and just said, look, I've got all the stuff for chain of command, let's just try it out. I mean, that's probably a bad analogy, because you can swap the two around anyway, can't you? Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's say blue shirt and everyone's playing, you know, chain of command. If you painted up both sides for blue shirt, you could just take that down and say, look, let's try this out, see what you think of Napoleonic gaming or whatever. You know, there's ways and means of getting around those issues, I think. And it's and obviously it costs more money and it's more time on one person. It's a lot of pressure, but I think, you know, you're painting armies anyway. Why not just paint the other side? Yeah. And then you can play them solo as well.
And and we're chatting via Zoom now. I mean, you have your YouTube channel, you have your blog, you're active on Twitter. You know, and obviously the other big impacting factor is obviously that we've been locked up in our own houses for such a long time as well.
Yeah, of course.
COVID-19. I mean, do you think we're making enough of the tools that we have available to us to overcome some of these difficulties?
Yeah, I think some people are. I think they are. Well, one of the first things that I did was when we went into lockdown, you may have seen it, the introduction to solo wargaming video. When I was just talking about just some basic ideas, I just jotted down a few ideas that I had for solo wargaming. Because when I was a kid, when I was in my teens, I used to solo wargame all the time, just to play a game, really. Because obviously your mate's not always available, or, you know, they're doing something else with family when you're kids and stuff. So anytime I was always playing some kind of solo game. I kind of stopped doing it for a bit, and I've picked it up with COVID, really, because again, one reason it gives me good content for the videos, if nothing else, for the channel, but also it's kind of replaced my show videos, because I was going to shows and videoing those, and they were quite regular, so I was creating content through them. So I had to rethink what my content output was going to be for the video, and I just thought, well, why don't I try some solo wargaming anyway. We're going to be locked down for the next X amount of weeks. I'm not going to be able to see my mates. The only way I'm going to get to play a game is by solo wargaming it. It's also a way of trying out rules. It's also a way of trying out different scenarios, all kinds of reasons for playing it. And I've learned chain of command myself by playing it against myself. I think with my mates, I've probably had 2 games of chain of command since I bought it last year. And it's just, we never had it on the table, apart from I've been able to play it myself. So now I know it pretty well. So when we do get to have a face-to-face game, I can say, right, okay, I know this. Well, I'll take you through a few steps and we'll, go from there, kind of things. It helps in that way. What I found, interestingly, was when I put up that video in the first place, and when I was talking about it initially back in April, solo gaming, a lot of people were, they were quite dismissive of it, really. And a lot of the comments you get is like, "Oh, I wouldn't play against myself because I'd always lose." It's like, okay, it's an old joke, yada yada yada. But you could always win, maybe, there seemed to be a little bit again of a blind spot. It's like the First World War, a blind spot from wargamers, who are used to playing against people, to actually solo wargaming, and it's just a case of just thinking outside the box a little bit, and just to think, just really reevaluating how you play games, what you get out of the game, and how to work it. And I think what's really helped me in solo wargaming, because I play a lot of board games as well, and lots of board games are cooperative, stuff like Pandemic, for example, perfect example. You're playing against an artificial intelligence, the game itself. So if you kind of transport that wargaming table, whereas you take one side, the AI takes the other side, and you just play against it. So you can use cards, you can use dice, any kind of tables. Charlie Walker of Fred Worthington fame on Twitter, he does a lot of solo wargaming because of his circumstances. He's a farmer, I think up north somewhere, and he does a lot of solo gaming, and he has like a whole Rolodex system of how units move and react and things, and what units turn up on the table. So you don't even know yourself. He talked about it in the Two Fat Lardy's Oddcast solo one. Yeah. If you remember that, and he had some really good ideas, way better than the stuff I put out.
Well, I saw some of the modifications you've been making to Iron Man Shotman. When you did your Stalingrad battle.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you're right. I mean, relatively simple modifications. And I'm thinking about things like, for example, artificial intelligence is far too highfalutin a phrase to describe some of the relatively simple flowcharts in things like Rangers of Shadow Deep.
But it is artificial intelligence in itself. It is a flowchart. That's all an AI is, flowcharts, isn't it?
But these things are not so insurmountably complex. You couldn't adapt them to other environments and other games.
Absolutely.
And I mean, and the other thing I also want to ask you about as well is, given we're in this sort of this theme of innovation in the hobby, really, was about your experiences at Virtual Lard. Because I mean, I know that Jeremy's got a new Virtual Lard coming up very soon.
Next week, in fact.
Quite nice to be able to mention his efforts there.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that you had a video up of you playing Doc Spirit. And that's something I'm really, really interested in getting into. But how did you find that? Because I think that was the first time you played the game, and it was in a completely online environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's a perfect example. Virtual Lard, it's on to its third one next week, which I've signed up for 2 games for. Another Duck's Brick game with Jeremy, and also Chain of Command, I think it is, in the afternoon. I can't remember exactly, but I'll read the email properly by next week. But yes, I've only played 1 game in each of the previous 2 Virtual Lards. Because the way he works it is you have a morning slot and then an afternoon slot. Jeremy has put absolutely vast amounts of work into organising this. I mean, it's heroic, really, because the amount of people that want to play these games and the amount of games that are on offer, him just working out and making sure people get what they want is really, really good. Kudos to him for that.
Yeah.
And I was apprehensive, let's say, before the first one, just because I'd not done it via Zoom before, and I wondered how it's going to work. I wonder how easy you're going to see the board, how are you going to be able to talk to other players. I didn't know anybody else who was playing that game. It was the first time I met any of them, met them in inverted commas through a camera, and it worked perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. It was really, really good. Really enjoyable experience. Again, Jeremy's Ducks game, I'd never played it, but the good thing about the Two Fat Lardy stuff is there's a lot of layover from one game to the next. So if you're familiar with one, you know how the mechanics of another one are going to work pretty well. So there wasn't too much difficulty in that. The way it works is basically Jeremy has set up a table. He's set up a couple of cameras, a close-up one, a long-range shot, so you can see the action. You can ask him to move the small camera around to wherever you want to see it on the table. You roll all the dice, either on or off camera. We all try to be, try to make sure that we're truthful about it. But now I've got a little movable camera that I can actually show the dice ready for next week.
The honesty cam.
Absolute honesty cam, that's it. And that worked really well, because then you feel as though you're actually playing the game, and it's like a participation game. Basically you're just not touching the pieces. You say, right, I want to move these to X, or as far as they'll get to X, and then basically he moves it for you. In most of the Lardy's rules, you're rolling those dice for movement. So basically you roll the moves, and he basically moves the pieces on the table, and then you plan it. And you're also able to talk privately to somebody who's your teammate, or you can do it via the camera anyway, just talk out loud. But we were doing it in between each other via instant message. So, there's all those kind of things as well, a little bit of radio chatter going on in the background, just saying, what do you want to do next? Should we move this in? Should we move that in? And it worked really, really well. The next one, Virtual Lord 2, I played Chain of Command. It was the Romanians versus the Germans in 1945, as the Germans were passing through Romania. And that, again, was really good. That was done by, his name will come to me. It'll come back to me, an Irish guy. Really well set up. Same again, his son's helping him out, moving the camera around, so he getting on the action and things. Yeah. And obviously these games, they take a little bit longer than you would normally game them. So, like, if Chain of Command or Ducks would probably only take a couple of hours, because that's how they're designed for club games. These ones took maybe four hours or so. Mm-hmm. Thereabouts, they were quite long, but that's because there's a lot of work from Jeremy's point of view, or from the other guy's point of view, moving stuff around and making sure things are in the right place. So, but if you're in for the long haul anyway, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we were in lockdown. What else was I going to do on a Saturday morning? Apart from play a virtual game. So there's ways and means of doing it. It's just having to think outside the box. And I know the other thing. One final point on this: on the back of Virtual Lardies, through the Discord server, quite a few people have set up games themselves, completely separate of Virtual Lard, and they've been very well received as well. So they've gone on to do other stuff as well. It's not just been around that one thing. So people are taking it on board as well.
I mean, I've tried similar kind of experiments with my local gaming mate. Hello, Nigel. And it very much depends, I think, on the type of game that you're playing as well. Some games definitely lend itself to that type of experience. I mean, we found What a Tanker was great.
Yeah.
Because you only got a few units on the table, relatively simple mechanics, and it's designed to play fast. So that was ideal. Mm-hmm. But I think it goes back to my point that I made earlier, though, about embracing the tools that we do have, and I think that the hobby really does need to innovate and embrace current themes, because I think there's a risk that we just become hopelessly nostalgic about things. That just because I, as a child, liked to play with really poor quality Airfix toy soldiers doesn't necessarily mean that giving my children the opportunity to buy poor quality Airfix soldiers is necessarily going to appeal to them.
Absolutely. And I think, we're again, we've had this debate on Twitter, and I think, like you said, there's a lot of nostalgia out there for the 70s and stuff. And, they were great for their times, but we're in 2020, and the amount of stuff you have as a wargamer on hand, if you know where to get it. We're talking about barriers. I think one of the biggest barriers is just not knowing where to get stuff from. because there is so much stuff. You can get lost in it, which is why from one point people like Warlord or Flames of War doing starter packs, as a basic, here you are, there's a box, 40 quid or whatever, get started, is a great thing. And it's a great entry point. And we never had that in the 70s. You had to, you had those. I wasn't a wargamer in the 70s, but I was, wargamer in the 80s, and not much had moved on in that time. You still got, the A4, A5 printed rule sets that were, all Xerox copied and stuff. And, they're great from a nostalgia point of view. But God, I tried to read, what was it? The WRG War Games, 1685 to 1845. I know there's a guy on Twitter at the moment who's been replaying it. I found a PDF of it online. I was trying to read it, and oh my God, honestly, for actually understanding any of those rules, because I couldn't understand them as a kid. I had them as a kid, and I couldn't even be bothered to read them then. I've tried to reread them now as a nearly 50-something adult, and I've got a master's degree and I still can't understand them. What am I doing wrong? But you'll pick up any of the stuff now that is really well printed, well presented. All the rules, that, like I say, and stuff like like the bolt actions, your Flames of War and things. They're well presented. They're designed to ensure that you have an enjoyable game. You could argue if they're historical or not till the cows come home. To get an enjoyable game out of it, which is what we're doing. We are war gamers. At the end of the day, that's what I prefer, an enjoyable game rather than sitting looking through charts and things. And I think we if there was a golden age of war game, and it's now because of the amount of stuff that's there that is available. You want Tang Dynasty Chinese in 12 mil. There'll be somebody that does them.
Yeah.
What I mean? They won't look like little blobs of crap either, will they? They'll actually look like they've got uniforms on,
Yeah. Well,
and they're probably in plastic and they're probably cheap, And you don't have to look at a photocopied list and hope that the figure comes back looking like what you think it does,
Yeah.
8 weeks later.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's a really, really kind of positive note, I think, on which kind of finish really, because. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the challenge is perhaps actually providing people with the information in an accessible form so that they can find, these fantastic companies. One of the things I found as a returning gamer was that how much stuff was out there.
Yeah,
companies that had been running since the 60s and the 70s I just never even heard of before.
Oh, yeah. I keep finding new things all the time. It's like I didn't know these people existed.
No.
But now I've got my 15mm barrels, whatever it is you need.
My life is complete.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not yet. I've still got to buy a few more things, but yes, completer.
Well, look, Alex, thank you very, very much for your time today.
It's been great. It's been great. Great to finally put a face to the name on Twitter. And
and you too. And and if an opportunity for some distant gaming presented itself, it would be great to get something sorted out. But look, thank you. This is the the second video, and hopefully what's going to be many to come. And very, very keen to kind of capture these war gamers' stories, really, because I think just talking to other gamers is one of the really, really interesting parts of the hobby.
Yeah, definitely. To see what other people's stories are, isn't it? Really, it's nice to hear it.
Well, absolutely. Well, Alex, thank you very, very much for your time today.
No problem.
Obviously, as I mentioned, Alex is on Twitter, on YouTube. I'll include all the links in the comments to the video below as well. Needless to say, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll be able to produce some more of this nonsense.
Excellent.
So anyway, take care. Thank you very much indeed, Alex.
Cheers. Thank you.